project area as far as what to build a wastewater master plan study around. So we talked around the idea of adding a couple properties, but then also taking some out. So what we intend to do is at the June B-1 committee, have the Woburn and Kernan make a presentation regarding the wastewater project area, talk a little bit about the effort that they're going to be involved with as far as studying the wastewater for Norfolk Center, and invite the planning board as well to that meeting to discuss the project map. That way, when they start to move forward and look at the wastewater options, we have a map, which essentially would be the district to build the study off of. So we plan to have that discussion on the 27th, no, sorry, not 27th, 29th of June. 29th? Yeah, sorry, June 29th.
So, Rich, we have 3 discussion items that night too. So this presentation is informational and on the short side, or is this intended to be like a back and forth?
No, I think the overall goal is to make it like a 20-minute, 25-minute discussion, somewhere along that order. And the reason why we just want to have at least agreement on, the boundaries of the on the project area for the sewage district. Just quickly, I'll just say it right now. As we know, technically right now, 25 Rockwood Road is in the B1 outer. It's, as you know, it's being developed as a 40B. So the discussion is most likely to take that out of the area. There's some other properties that we don't want to really put forth an effort on, properties that already have a plan in place and a permit. So it's more a discussion, those components of it. And hopefully come to agreement. So then they can go forward, do their design flows based on build out. And the one thing we did talk about the first meeting, they do need to kind of think about in terms of at least presuming some of these changes would occur. So at least there's something to build a study around, as opposed to presuming, they have to make some assumptions going in. So it makes sense to at least consider that these changes could occur and then work backwards. That's one of the discussion points that we just want to confirm with that meeting. And the last item is the deliverable on this is February of 2021. And that's going to be dependent upon, how the process unfolds as well. So it certainly can meet that target date, but things could slide depending on how, as we discuss each item as we go, it might shift a little bit, but the goal is to deliver the final report by February 2021 with a recommendation.
All right. Any questions on the wastewater plan? All right, let's move on to building scale. So this will start the first of we're breaking up our sort of warrant item discussions into basically thirds, and we're going to get through 3 of them tonight, 3 of them the next meeting, and 3 of them at the meeting beyond that. So tonight we have building scale, PMLD, and building height, and Ed gets to be our guinea pig and start us off with our building scale conversation.
Yep. Okay. So what I'd first like to do is just take you through some of the process that I went through to examine the properties to come up with some final determination as to what I would recommend. And I looked at the GIS map, and I broke the B1 district into 3 areas. So the first area I called Main Street East, which is really the east of the Rotary. That's kind of down near Dunkin' Donuts, the fire station, down that end of the B1 area.
Ed, can I stop you real quick?
Sure.
Rich, do you mind pulling up the map from the MAPC study, just so that we can?
Well, I was thinking, why don't I just go the GIS one and it has a little more than
Yeah,
the
GIS is easier.
Because I think there's value in having the buildings.
buildings.
That's on the GIS map, I think. That's on the GIS map.
Let me,
You know what's not on the GIS map is the outline of the B1 district.
No, that's right.
well, it can be. So can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
All right. So I can turn the zoning layer on and off as you discuss it.
Okay.
to
So-
help.
But that's not the B1 map, right?
No, it is.
It isn't.
It
Yeah,
is.
it is.
This is
That's
the
the B1
B1 outer, and this is the B1 inner.
Okay.
Okay. So to the right there, which is the red area, including what is the gas station and that little corner plaza there, I called Main Street East. And there's really no open parcels over there right now other than Norfolk town-owned properties. Not too big. The largest property over there is about 1.5 acres, not including the fire station, which is a larger property. I'm not going to include that. So I looked at that first. I didn't see that the likelihood of really important development is going to happen over there in the short term, or maybe even in the long term. Those three properties, 118, 114, and 112, they have homes on it right now. 114 and 112 have water on it, so I don't know if there's a conservation issue ultimately for development in the long run anyway. So they weren't likely candidates that I really focused on. Long and narrow properties, like I said, the largest being about 1.5 acres. Then I moved over to the left side, if you could just move over a little, Rich, and to what I called Main Street West, which is along Main Street, all the way from the circle over to Boardman Street. Now there are a couple of large parcels there. Actually, one large parcel. Sorry, there's one large parcel that's undeveloped right now, and that's 201. That's almost 2.5 acre property that's undeveloped right now. The rest of the properties currently are developed and have homes. So the likelihood of redevelopment certainly is what we might want, especially at 194, 154, and 144-146. To me, that's the heart of, I would think that it's going to be the heart of the business district, are those three parcels. 194 is 2.5 acres. 144, 148 is 1.25 acres, and 156 is 1 acre. So there's potential there, certainly. 201 is 2.5 acres. Then the third parcel that I looked at, I called Liberty Lane. Now there's a lot of potential there. That's really undeveloped past Silla's and Walgreens. There's some large parcels there, number 6 and 8. They're two different parcels, but it's the same owner. There's a little over 2 acres right there. 7 and 9 are the same owner. That's the eastern. That's 4.5 acres. So there, like I said, so I looked at it as 3 different, I'll say, commercial areas.
Yeah, so Rich, I'm sorry, I'm going to make my recommendation again. So the map that's in the MAPC study colors this out so we can follow along with Ed's conversation. I think it would be helpful for those that aren't taking notes. Go ahead, Ed, sorry.
Okay. So that's how I looked at it, analyzed all the properties and obviously the potential of them to come up with a recommendation for the building size. Obviously, what Susan is doing with building height could have some bearing on it, but we'll hear from Susan when she gets up and speaks.
It's page
Now-
49, Rich.
Okay, now, as a basis, I looked at 18 Union Street. Now, 18 Union Street is not a full acre lot, and the building there is about 18 or 19,000 square foot. It's 2.5 stories high. And I just kept going back downtown and looking at that building and thinking that it's really a great looking building. It's a good sized building. Would I really want to have a building larger than that in Norfolk Center? And my feeling was no. I thought, especially along Main Street, I couldn't see a building higher than that, like 3.5 story. So the 19,000 square feet seemed to fit in with the recommendation that we had in for the maximum of 25,000 square feet. You know, it could be configured a little bit differently. There's obviously issues of land coverage and parking and how much that would be needed. So I felt that the maximum of 25,000 feet for most of the parcels in downtown was a reasonable criteria for the planning department to use. Now, also recognizing that there are other criteria like setbacks and land usage and all that would also come into play. So I was comfortable with the 25,000, leaving the 25,000. What I was not comfortable leaving the 25,000 with were 3 parcels. 201 Main Street, which is 2.5 acres. The 7 and 9 Liberty Lane, which is 4.5 acres. And the 6 and 8 Liberty Lane, which is 2.2 acres. These are large parcels of land, and I felt that a small building on those large parcels both would not lend to a streetscape that would lend to walking and having people go from building to building. And I don't think it would be an incentive to a developer. So I don't know what the right answer is. I don't think it's 50,000 square feet. Is it 35,000 square feet? I'm not sure, but maybe that's where we have the discussion, is on those 3 large parcels, which really will become the heart of the downtown area. And any kind of development that would be meaningful, at least in the short term, to the downtown area. Now, the only other thing that I might also throw in there especially for these larger parcels, and I don't see any place that we have an accommodation, would we allow dual buildings? So for example, we have 25,000 square feet as a maximum. If there were 2 buildings at 25,000 square feet, does our zoning guidelines allow for something like that? If the developer so chose to do something like that? I can't.
Right. So Ed, let's talk to that real quick, right? I mean,
okay.
The proposed zoning, the last time we had the conversation, or at least the way it's written in our executive summary, right, is any single building, the maximum size is 25,000 square feet, right? So just to put this in context of your conversation, right? The 18 Union Street project maxed out the size of its site, right?
Yep.
And
But that's not even a full acre lot.
right, that building's not even a full acre, right? So, you know, on the larger lot, the 144163, you could potentially have 2 18 Union Streets.
Right.
Right. But
Right.
no single building, the way the language is currently written for discussion, could be larger than 25,000 square feet.
So does our language allow for dual buildings? And I'm not a builder or a developer, so I have no knowledge of whether this would be interesting to them. Would they be interested in putting up 2 buildings as opposed to 1 larger building? I don't know the answer to that.
I would say yes, the language as we've crafted it allows multiple buildings on sites that are large enough to allow it.
Okay.
right?
Can I ask
And
a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ed.
No, so I'm just gonna think, I'm thinking also from a cost perspective and a efficiency perspective. Would a builder want to put two buildings as opposed to one larger building? That's it. So go ahead, Susie.
If I just to weigh in on that, Ed, that typically does add cost to a project.
Sure.
But if it is a requirement, then and developers can still find a financially feasible way to make it through the project, then I mean that could be something that they accommodate.
Okay. So that's really, I think, what we want to talk about. Then just one last point is if we look back over to 154 or 150, sorry, 156 and 144, where there currently are buildings on them now. I wouldn't say they're efficient buildings for the size of the properties. You know, maybe that we would and 194, sorry, we could incentivize redevelopment in those areas because they're also large lots, and they would really be key if we were talking about a walkable downtown. That's where you'd want to have the focus of some retail business, you know, that people would take advantage of.
All right, so I'm realizing that I probably should have started this with a bit of an introduction on building scale, based on the way our documents are written, right? So let me jump in real quick. So if you look at our executive summary page, right, it outlines building scale. And for those following along, you know, building scale generally addresses the allowable area of the footprint of a building on a site. In other words, just how big the ground floor area of a new building can be, right? So the existing language we have today limits all new buildings to 15,000 square feet maximum, except for municipal buildings at 30,000 square feet and a grocery store at 50,000 square feet.
Is that ground level or total?
That's ground level.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So, you know, we had our previous proposal, I'll call round one. You know, we had no limit on the allowable area. The limits were set by other guidelines. There was no maximum allowable square foot, and we kept the designations for municipal buildings and grocery store, right? So some of the feedback we heard is that having no limit on an allowable area seems inappropriate. There should be a maximum size, and that was taken into consideration. And, you know, there were lots of conversations about how this building scale item ties into other ones like building height and whatnot, right? So another document to keep in mind is the design guidelines, which outline sort of the relationship of all of these items. It's something we should probably flip through real quick. And then I just wanted to get to what's written in as our current recommendation for conversation. It's to cap the maximum footprint of any single new building at 25,000 square feet.
Okay.
With no exceptions unless by special permit or approval. So the designations for municipal buildings and grocery store have been removed, and it's been simplified down to simply cap the maximum square foot of any single new building at 25,000 square feet.
Okay, so that I misunderstood the 25,000. I thought it was the total building.
Right, so that's sort of a quick summary, building on what Ed was talking about. You know, we can get into some of the past discussion, or perhaps open it up to the group now for thoughts on what Ed's talking about and where we've been in the past. So why don't we open it up?
I have something.
Oh, Susan, go ahead.
Yeah. In essence, what we're talking about is, for the people on the call who don't refer to them by lot numbers or areas, we're talking about the piece of land next to Scylla's and the whatever that was, a physical therapy place, the large lot, which butts up to the MBTA parking lot, and the one across the street. The third one that is over an acre is, I believe, across the street from the corner of Boardman. I'm not 100% on this. I think that one's the one that's privately owned by Mr. Chipman.
That's 201.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 lots that we're talking about. Mr. Chipman's going to do, Mr. Chipman's going to do. And the other 2 lots are in essence. So this has been my problem with this from the beginning. What you're doing by lowering the square footage is forcing Stop and Shop to give up their lease, which means, so for right now, if everyone in town is scared of 40B, and the whole point of changing the zoning is to get more friendly development that's not 40B so that they'll actually put commercial in, which is what we say creates a walkable downtown. The lots have been owned for almost a decade and they haven't gone 40B. If they were going to go 40B, they would have already. These 2 particular lots. By forcing Stop and Shop to give up its lease by capping the square footage of a grocery store, you're now going to have the chance that someone's going to develop that as a 40B. Whereas if you just left the language that specifically says grocery stores can go in there up to 50,000 square feet, then Stop and Shop won't give up the lease, and we don't have to worry about a 40B going in. That's my opinion. I think it would be absurd to force them to give up a lease until the other lots have been developed and we know what the downtown area is going to look like. I wouldn't want to vote for something that's going to force them out because we don't know. I've said this from the beginning when it concerns other things. For example, people complain about the 40B that went in on Cleveland, but they also complained about the guy who wanted a pig farm on Cleveland. You can't have it both ways. So if you want to complain that there's too many 40B projects, it's going to be too tall, it's going to be too big, it's going to be 4 stories, it's going to be on 5 acres of land, then why are we doing something that's forcing Stop and Shop to give it up? I don't understand that. You never know what is going, usually what happens is what comes in is actually worse than what was there before. If you complain and complain and complain and force people out, then what you're going to end up with is probably not what you wanted. Right now, Stop and Shop owns that land or leases that land. They're not going to give it up unless we change these zoning laws. We change these zoning laws and now whomever can take it and do what they want with it. I just don't think that makes logical sense. I think you should keep in that a grocery store can go on that lot. That's my opinion.
So Susan, let me speak to that a little bit. One, I don't think there's any specific targeting of Stop and Shop going on here. I think this has been a product of much discussion. I would also make the argument that there's been nothing stopping Stop and Shop from putting a 50,000 square foot grocery store on that site for the same amount of time as some of the other requirements, and that hasn't happened either.
Oh, I don't think Stop and Shop wants to put a grocery store there.
Well, I'm just saying, I don't think a 50,000 square foot Stop and Shop or grocery store is any more feasible than a 40B development there. So
No, you're missing my point.
the question is how do we encourage development of lots that haven't been developed over time? And that is, we need to change some of the language that's been restricting development. So we're trying to figure out how to open that up. As I mentioned, the previous iteration of this had no limit on the square footage as well. And the limit was brought back due to significant opposition to open-ended square footage developments where maybe the other language of the setbacks and whatnot wasn't strong enough.
Yeah,
I'd also like to add to that there's been a lot of discussion about what an appropriate grocery store would be for the town of Norfolk, right? And we had conversations about a Brothers similar to what's in Medfield, right? And the Brothers and similar styles of stores like that are closer to 20,000 square feet or 15 or 16,000 square feet. So nowhere near the 50,000 square foot limit. So I think a lot of the discussion that's been behind this has been towards, again, not targeting any specific landowner, but targeting what the general feel appropriate size, both in height and scale of a building in downtown Norfolk would be. And this is kind of where we've ended up.
Mm-hmm. Again, I'm on the advisory committee, so I was part of this discussion, part of the, pushback on it, so to speak. And it was never that there was no square footage whatsoever. It was that there was no square footage for any building except a grocery store. Let's limit the grocery store only to 20,000 square feet. but no one else is limited in their square footage. That's
There were municipal buildings in that too. So it wasn't just
that was the
grocery store.
previous language that we objected to. But again, my point, that's been taken out. And that's not of no concern. I've never thought Stop and Shop actually wants to put a grocery store in there. What I'm saying is, if you change the zoning laws to stop, in my opinion, and from different conversations I've had with different town leaders, Stop and Shop acquired the lot to stop anyone else from putting a grocery store in there so that we would have to use their 2 Stop and Shops in Foxborough and in Franklin. They don't want to put a Stop and Shop there. They just don't want anyone else to put a grocery store in that would compete with their business. So it's never, we're not in any danger of it. However, if you remove the zoning for grocery stores, they no longer have to fear that a grocery store would go in there and co-opt their business. So then they would give up their lease. That is my point. My point was never that any grocery store would go in. I don't think traffic patterns would allow a grocery store to go in. I think Stop and Shop just wants to hold on to it to prevent that from happening. And if you change the zoning, and if you say in that zoning specifically, no grocery store over 20,000 square feet, then you are in essence forcing Stop and Shop to give up the lease. They could have done it at any point because I don't think they have a desire. I think they've held on to it because they don't want anyone else to build there. And I think that that's very short-sighted. I think you will regret, not obviously not you personally. I think the town will regret what will in essence go in there. It's almost 5 acres. We don't know what.
Susan, can I ask what your alternative is? Like, what would you rather it say? Do you want it to say that grocery stores are allowed?
Yes. If I
I
had,
just think you're speculating a lot about what Stop and Shop thinks. I just don't know if that's beneficial, but what's your end goal? Do you want it? What's the language that you're proposing?
the language that I would propose is to keep it, the language the way it was before, which is 15,000 square feet for a single building, and except for grocery stores and municipal buildings. If you want to increase the 15,000 because you don't think it's enough and you want to go up to 20 or 25, that's really doesn't impact that largest lot. It impacts the other smaller lots. I would personally not like to see development on that 4.5 acre lot until the rest of downtown has been developed, because I would be afraid of what would go in there if we force Stop and Shop to give up their lease, which is what we would be doing if we limited the size of a grocery store. So I would
Ask for a special permit? Is this one of the special permit ones?
No, but that's a good point, Martha, that, you know, Stop and Shop could come in and say, hey, you know what, I want to put in a 50,000 square foot grocery store, and they could do that under a special permit process.
Okay.
that's all I wanted to say. That was my objection to changing it.
Well, but-
Anybody else have any thoughts on this one on the board? The
Well,
committee?
I don't think we can exclude one parcel of property from our zoning laws, though. So if we have to come up with a zoning rule that applies to everything. We can't, I don't think we can just say it applies to all property except for one, and we're not gonna have zoning on it. So isn't that the predicament that we're gonna be in?
I don't think you should apply it specifically to one lot. I think that should be the language for any of them. Any lot that could fit a 50,000 square foot grocery store could in essence have one. But between parking and the size of the grocery store, there's only 2 lots, maybe even only one that could actually even fit that.
There's only one, right?
Yeah.
Unless they combine lots. Right.
So you're really only talking about that one lot. So I wouldn't say you're writing in language. I would never suggest that we write in language that says this specific lot. I would think that would open us up to being sued anyway. We would say we were singling someone out. But there isn't another area unless they combine lots. I would assume a 50,000 square foot grocery store would need at least 3.5 acres, would be my guess. I'm obviously not a
So-
developer or a builder, but
So
that would,
let's put this into perspective a little bit, right? The Scylla's physical therapy building is in the neighborhood of 4,000 square feet.
Mhm.
Right. Walgreens is in the neighborhood of 14,000 square feet.
Right.
And the library is in the neighborhood of 26,000 square feet. Right. So a 50,000 square foot grocery store would be twice the size of the library in floor plan alone.
Without parking.
right. Which would mean that we're really only still talking about the one lot, which is currently.
Right, so if we can, I think if we, I mean, Susan's point's made about her thoughts on the Stop and Shop property. I think if we change the conversation a bit to the rest of the district and what the appropriate scale is, we can come back to the specific grocery store on a single lot, right? So, again, some odd reason I don't have what the square footage is of the 18 Union Street project down. Rich, do you know that offhand?
The first
Yeah.
floor is about 6,000.
What's
Right,
the
so
lot coverage of the lot? You said the library was around 27,000.
Library is 26,000 square feet.
26,000. What's the lot coverage for that? What's the size of the lot? Just out of curiosity, so that we could see how big it would be on a single acre.
I'll, hold on a minute. We can,
Well, Rich is looking for that. Can I just ask a question or kind of just ask why we are not considering that lots do get combined? Boyd's Crossing is multiple lots, multiple owners, was sold to Fisher. So he was able to do that project because he bought Mr. Chipman's other lot from him. So that happens all the time. So I am not comfortable with sort of saying, oh, we don't really got to worry. Let's just focus on these three and imagine what it might look like, because that just doesn't, that seems a little short-sighted to me.
Well, Martha, I'll add to that I think that's some of the thinking behind any single building is capped at 25,000 square feet, right? So even if lots were combined over time, you still need a significant size lot to get two buildings on it, right? So if we were to look at the map again, the MAPC map, you could start to do the math on what lots would need to be combined to get to multiple buildings, right? And you need to get to basically 80,000 square feet in order to support multiple buildings, right? So take for instance it's 144121, which is 18 Union Street, right? We've often said that development maxed out its as of right capacity on that site, right? And that's about a 40,000 square foot site. So if you need a site that's double that in order to max out a 25,000 square foot building.
Aaron, just in response to that, Chris Henry, 30 Boardman Street, I think the important thing to quantify with that is you're giving that data based on the present guidelines for what the sewer accommodations are, and those numbers are going to change. And are we looking at those numbers? That if we go to Title V requirements for everyone and the requirement for how much land you need to have a septic system changes, does that change those numbers you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. We should definitely look into that. And I think, as I mentioned last week, I think you'll find that the sewer requirements are going to exceed the allowable build requirements based on square footage and units, right? So with the 25,000 square foot maximum per building we're setting, and the number of residential units we're setting, which is a part of a different conversation, you don't, they are both below what a sewer system would allow. So the zoning would be regulating the density, not the septic system, or not the sewer system.
Okay, well, that's where my confusion comes in. It seems like it's a double-ended discussion of that, oh, don't worry, the lots don't accommodate it, followed by don't worry, the sewer doesn't accommodate it, followed by those are all moving targets. So that's where I say I'd like to see some clarity on that, some hard numbers. And I think Rich's, study for what is the build out capability of what's existing and what can happen in the future should be an important part of that discussion.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think we could probably get better numbers for you on that when we talk about the residential unit numbers too.
I look forward to that.
Yeah.
So just to kind of close that loop, I think when you put the proposal together, when you're talking to the public, I think it's important to avoid we're not going to worry about combining lots, and more speak to the reason there's a 25,000 square foot cap is because for these sorts of protections, I think you would be better served by sort of pointing out the protections that this new zoning proposal is trying to give to the residents of Norfolk, because it feels developer heavy, I think, to a lot of people who are just tuning in a little bit. I think if we learn anything from watching 6 acres of trees get clear cut, and all of a sudden all the people who wake up and are like, oh my God, what's happening? I think we have to prepare for that objection, those sorts of emotional responses with the right answers that I feel like are in there, but aren't always presented sort of cogently, so that people go, oh, okay, I see this piece. And I know you're working towards that. This piece of the puzzle fits into this. So I think my last question then to tie that together is the design review guidelines. Are those mandatory or just suggested?
So right now they're guidelines. They're not mandatory. One of
Can we
the
make them mandatory? Like in Chatham, you can only have wooden signs that are a certain height off the ground and a certain width. You can only go, you have to keep within the architecture in certain parts of their zoning. And I know lots of towns are like that. So would it be possible to say, hey, this is what we want Norfolk to look like in our town center? And that's a mandate. You have to follow those guidelines or you can't do it. I don't know what the legal piece around that is. If you could explain that.
Yeah. I think one of the things we were talked about, and as part of this conversation, is moving them as we get along the way into formally adopting them, and so that way they become embedded in the design review requirements of the zoning bylaw as well as the site plan review, so they have more teeth, more strength. And then Josh could touch on you can blend it. Some stuff could become mandatory and some stuff could become guidelines. It depends how far, like where we want to go with the different pieces of the design guidelines. But the bottom line would be that we want to formally incorporate them into the design review board regulations and the bylaw and the site plan. So they have more teeth, more latitude than right now. Because right now they haven't been formally adopted.
Don't you have to go to a form-based zoning format?
Design guidelines, which you currently have, which we've drafted, are not mandatory, as you've all been describing, but they are an effective way to guide the outcomes appropriately while retaining flexibility in those conversations. You can move, I wouldn't suggest moving wholesale the document which you have as guidelines today into something more mandatory, which would be a design standard. Design standards are integrated with the zoning bylaw and would become mandatory. I think you could take pieces of the guidelines you have right now and translate them into design standards, but then there's no flexibility as would be suggested in those requirements, which in some cases you do want, I think, as the question points to, but in other cases, having the guidance provided to a developer and his design team is a good setting of the stage so that then they can move a design to a place that both matches what the town wants, but also provides them some creativity in how they're resolving a solution. So that's a little more background on that. I'm happy to answer more questions if there are more from that.
And I'll add to that too, that, there are parts of the design guidelines that are part of the zoning, right? Like pitched roofs are required. The height is set by the zoning guidelines. So, maybe some of the more, I'll call it flowery language of the design guidelines isn't mandatory because it's meant to be a guide and it's meant to be more flexible. I think the points that are less flexible on actually are part of the zoning guidelines. So if there are some bullet points in the design guidelines that we think should be mandatory, we could talk about pulling those out. But they were written to be guidelines and not necessarily standards.
And this topic right now is actually part of it because we're talking about the scale of it, right? How big the building people would want to see. Like, we don't want a building X, Y, the mass of it, and then stories above it. So it's going to work in tandem. This is one of those requirements. The other one we'll talk about a little bit too is the height too. The design guidelines will work back into whatever we land on with the building height as well.
Right.
Okay,
So
I think painting that picture will be important too, because I think people have a hard time visualizing. And I know Susan's going to talk about building height. And I think people don't know what that looks like until they have an example. So making sure that people appreciate that there are some other safeguards built in around pitch roofs, for example, that kind of thing. I think weaving that together is important.
No, I agree. Yeah,
Right. So real quick, because I know we've been trying to answer this question for some folks for a long time. Rich, could you switch back to the MAPC map? So just to give you an idea of the size of the lot that's required, and if you could scoot to center it a little bit, Rich, right? So really there's only, well, certainly two large buildings of say 15,000 square feet or more on the same lot. There's really only two lots right now. It's the two lots we've talked about here a little bit today. The one we affectionately call the Stop and Shop lot, which is 144163, which is the big green lot. Rich, maybe you could use your cursor to point it out, right? And then the second lot is the lot on Main Street, across the street from the post office, right? So, I mean, those two sites are the only ones that can really support two large buildings at this point. There are others that could support two buildings. They'd be smaller, right? So the post office is one, 144915, right? Another one is closer to the center of the town where the bank is now, the 1450 and the pizza shop is. The 1452 site is one that could support multiple buildings and actually has multiple buildings on it. And then the next one that's big enough is all the way down past Dunkin' Donuts, and it's 1456-4, right? Which is sort of behind the two automotive shops that are back there. So, there's really only 5 as of right lots in town support multiple buildings right now. Now, again, if you want to get into the conversation of combining lots, there are certainly lots that could be combined to support larger buildings, such as it's sort of in the town center, the town green, the 3 lots next to the town green area, 14, 41, 59, 16, 61, right? You could potentially combine all those lots, but those lots are narrow and, you have setbacks that would impact the volume of that building as well. You'd still only have buildings that max out at 25,000 square feet. And mind you, the library in this diagram is 25,000 square feet. So that library wouldn't even fit on these 3 sites, right? The building would have to be shaped in a different fashion in order to get it to fit on these sites. So you would also then be taking 3 lots, combining them into 1 lot and putting 2 buildings on them. So instead of having 3 buildings on 3 lots, you'd have 2 buildings on 3 lots, right? So in terms of density and volume, you're still at a lower number. So, just to speak to the potential of combining lots, it is certainly there. But I think the way, and we'll talk about that here over the next couple of months, is the way some of our proposals are put out there is even in combining lots, the maximum development is still thought of to be capped so that you're not creating mega sites and mega buildings. on those sites.
Aaron, I think it would be helpful if at some point somebody could speak to what those numbers really are, and those, and that if in fact those caps, as you say, are there, what are they? In other words, if we were to combine those 3 lots you spoke of, the largest square foot building would be X, or if we were to consider the other large green parcel that's up at the top corner, and we combined it with the 2 lots that come around Boardman, what is the largest formula that can come out? I mean, there are multiple sites, and when I say multiple, I mean 3 or 4. Why can't we build out what that would be and tell people if in fact those protections are there, what are they?
Yeah, no, I certainly think we can. I think the options are infinite, and I think we need to get a little bit closer to what this committee wants to support for caps and numbers and items, and then we can start to build out some of those scenarios.
Okay, but that fundamentally right there is where you lose me, is that it can't be both. It can't be there are only these few choices and the numbers are infinite, right?
Yeah.
It's one or the other.
Yeah, you
All right.
threw me with the infinite.
All right, well then, so then let's do this. If I could ask you guys to do some homework for us. Can you take the map, the MAPC map, and identify 5 groups of lots that could potentially be combined, and we'll put numbers together to have those for discussion?
Happy to do that. Thank you very much.
Just a point of clarity too, the
We share
diagram,
those with Rich? Sorry,
Yep.
who do we share those with?
You can send them to me and then I'll share it with the committee.
Perfect. Thank you.
the diagram, which has been on the screen as well, which we prepared with as part of our work over the last year, is a parcel analysis. And that parcel analysis was a part of a potential build out that we did as part of the effort to bring forward the previous zoning recommendations. And as Aaron suggests, that the framework for running those types of calculations has been established and can be plugged in. But I think the mystery right now is settling back down on a set of zoning characteristics to run those calculations again. So they're not something, there's something that are set up, but that are not instantaneous and that are time consuming. So it'd be good to have the recipe for the zoning recommendations to do those.
Isn't this the recipe?
Well,
Isn't that what we're discussing right now?
yeah, that's what he's saying. But my question is, your last recommendations, did you do that parcel build out?
Yes, there's a description of that in the report, which is being flipped through right now.
Okay.
And that included combining of lots?
It did not include combining of lots. It was focused on the lots which you see color coded on the screen, the red being lots which are unlikely to change, the green being lots which are likely to change in the near term, the yellow being lots over the long term. And it looked at each of those lots which are color coded green and yellow as single uncombined lots that were redeveloped. So for example, it's imaginable that if you took all the lots that are color coded yellow that run from 1456-6 to 1456-56, those could potentially be combined into one lot under a scenario. That scenario we did not run, but that, I mean, as you're suggesting in the question, that would be an option which could be looked at.
All right, I'd like to sort of bring the conversation back to the bullet points for tonight. So if we could just real quick cap, if people have continuing questions on this one, go ahead and send them into Rich and we'll work to get them addressed. But I think we need to move on to the next item here.
So John did that. Aaron?
A quick recap to Ed's point. It sounds like the 25,000 cap is still in discussion. There have been a couple points brought up on, is it reasonable to get rid of some of the language in there about 50,000 square foot and 30,000 square foot buildings, and then some homework to do on, potential sewer capacity and build out numbers. And some of our loyal followers are going to give us some potential lot collections so that we can run some numbers there for discussion. I don't know, I don't want to open it up for discussion again, but any closing thoughts from any of the committee members on the scale discussion?
I do see John.
Clarify a point with Susan. Susan, was your point that you were against or for eliminating the 50,000 square foot, let's say, large building zoning? Were you advocating for or against? I'm not, just going to clarify, please.
What I am saying is that the previous, not the previously proposed language, but the current zoning language where it says except for good Lord, I can't speak, municipal buildings and grocery stores
Right.
can exceed square footage, 15,000. I don't have, I mean, it all depends on, to me, the size of the building also depends on the size of the lot. I think to say that a lot that is already larger than an acre still can only put a 25,000 square foot building. I don't have a problem with the fact that they can only put one 25 square foot building, but that same person who has a half acre can also put a 25,000 square foot building. I feel like that language in itself should be worded in a way that makes it inclusive of the size of the lot.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. And I think that eliminating the 50,000 square foot language for grocery stores is short-sighted because I think we're going to end up regretting that. But again, just my opinion. That's the way I would vote. That would be the language I would suggest using, is that it was, it stays 15,000 for anything under 3/4 of an acre, and it can go up to 25,000 for anything over 3/4 of an acre, except for grocery stores and municipal buildings, which are 30 and 50. That would be the proposed language I would use. However, I guess that's all I'm saying. That's the proposed language I would use. So I'm not dismissing, the fact that we need to change the language to encourage encourage development. I just don't know that we need to change it that broadly.
Aaron, could I add a little context to your meeting?
Please.
The DePlacido building on the corner is 30,000 square feet, not 40.
That's total, that's not footprint though, John. Right.
No, the lot is 30,000 square feet. You had mentioned 40. My point was, he did maximize that lot coverage pretty much, and that footprint is only about 8,000 square feet.
Okay.
Now on Walgreens, the other point, I think Walgreens on an oversized lot, and that footprint, did you say was 14,000 feet, Walgreens?
Yes.
Yeah.
The only reason Walgreens fit there is because we allowed common parking with the Sillas building, because Walgreens with that size did not work having the parking on its own lot. And the other two minor things is on the big lot for the Stop and Shop, that corner lot 144162 was actually combined with the main lot a long time ago, as was the lots on the other side of Liberty Lane. Lot 144161, that's a bunch of land that has all restrictions on it, including open space for some odd reason. So currently that is combined with lot 144160. And lot 144160 and 144159, I believe they're just barely around the 30,000 square feet. So I think that when we looked at the footprint years ago, now granted the center of town lots owned by Ray Cahaley and Stop and Shop have stormwater and wastewater. The other lots, I believe how it worked out is, even though there's a 15,000 foot footprint allowed, I don't believe with the parking requirements and loading facilities and walkways, let alone stormwater and septic, although you can park over septic, I don't believe much more than an 8,000 or 9,000 footprint for a building will fit on a 30,000 foot lot. So if that gives you some perspective on what's what.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I'll say too, we're talking about a lot of numbers here. If Rich was to click one page further into the document, all of these square foot numbers, build out areas, et cetera, are there for your perusal. So if you want to go through the numbers to see lot sizes and buildable areas and FARs, you can do that. So it's all there in the MAPC report.
Aaron, can I just make a point that the map we just looked at doesn't correspond with the GIS map? I don't know which one is correct or incorrect.
Yeah, that's the point I was trying to make in the beginning, and I'm going to move on. So
Okay.
my understanding is the map we're looking at is correct.
I guess the only point I want to just to kind of understand what's not correct, because the
colors are hard to see on the GIS map. I think the other thing to take into consideration is we talk about the B1 district as a single district. It's actually made up of two parts, right? The inner and the outer. So it's a little confusing in the GIS map, in my opinion.
Well, this is an example, what John just referenced at 144161, 144160, and 144159. On the GIS map, there's only a 144160 and a 144159. So there's a variance right there alone.
Yeah.
You know, it's missing the housing development on Liberty Lane. That's on the back side of 1441. 144911. There's it doesn't show that housing development in there. So there is discrepancies that I think are important to notice.
well, just for not to totally poo-poo the zoning map for the town. So Josh has added some of the more recent developments that are on the one in front of you.
Yeah.
The one below the GIS one.
Yeah, I think you might be looking at an old map, Ed.
Yeah.
All right, well, we've got to move on. So let's move on to the PMLD discussion.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question real quick, Aaron, before you move on? Are we going to vote tonight on which way we're going to move, how we're going to move forward? Was that the point of this, or are we going to?
No, I know that was in the agenda, but I think if you look at our calendar, we need to get through, we can't vote on any one item until we get through all of them because they're all interrelated. So
Okay.
the goal is to vote at the meeting, I think like 29 July, if I'm going from memory there. But I think we need to get through discussion points on all of the items before we vote. So I think when we get towards I think it's the end of July meeting, we'll have to put together a summary and I'm sure we will have discussions about building scale as we get into the other building items. So there's no reason to close the book on it.
Okay.
Tonight. All right, so on to the PMLD and the planned multi-lot development. And I guess I can try and give a little bit of history on this one too. I'll start with the summary from beginning first. So the planned multi-lot development, we think was put in to address provisions for larger development, but we're not quite sure. The existing zoning language essentially allows planned multi-lot developments, and we had previously proposed maintaining the existing language because we were just going to ignore it. But I think the current recommendation is that we remove the planned multi-lot development language. And so let's get into what a planned multi-lot development might be. There is no standard definition of what a planned multi-lot development is. We think that Norfolk made up the zoning guidelines of what planned multi-lot development is, maybe loosely based on what a PUD is, which is a planned unit development. Planned unit developments basically create homeowners associations and shared goods, shared uses. So the concept, I think, was applied to a planned multi-lot development in that owners of lots could pool resources and provide sewer, parking, et cetera, that was shared among lots. So I think it goes without saying that this concept hasn't promoted development downtown and needs to be updated. I think, I don't know, it would require unprecedented cooperation between landowners and I would imagine some hefty legal agreements in terms of long-term use of shared resources. So my guess is that's part of the reason why it was never acted upon. Again, I mentioned some of the benefits are potentially pooling resources, such as parking and septic, but it hasn't happened to date. So talked to some folks around town. I asked Rich to look into it to see if he could discover anything further from the history. And I asked Josh to look into it to see if there were any local references. So the early feedback I got from Josh was, nope, it's a uniquely Norfolk designation. But he said he might look in to see if even the planned unit development, there were any local resources. So Josh, have you managed to find anything locally that we could reference in terms of planned multi-lot developments?
Yeah, to my knowledge, regionally in the MAPC region, I have not found any other references to planned multi-lot development specifically. I do think that it's a creation by Norfolk to probably solve a certain particular situation or problem at one point that was integrated with the zoning. As you've mentioned in your remarks, the planned unit development PUD is more widely known and used, but is also used kind of on an ad hoc basis throughout the region to, I think, basically address specific zoning needs of a municipality. I think the most recent to have used that type of setup was the town of Milton, but they still are kind of customizing it to their own needs. It's not like there's a really standard model for how that's used.
All right. And Rich, did you manage to find anything
So
in the town records?
Well, so the PMLD was enacted in 1993. There was, I went back through the minutes back in 1993, and there really wasn't any discussion related to the PMLD. It was part of a major package for the creation of the B-1 and the C-1 at the time. So really, I wasn't able to get much background. Although, Aaron, I suppose if you wanted to talk to Bob Nicodemus, he might be able to help out because he was on the planning board back then when they brought forward this major change relative to the zoning bylaw. But I don't, beyond that, I will say that, there are many other ways to allow for ownership of property and still share resources that the private developer could do if they want, as opposed to the town putting forward the framework. I mean, there are, somebody owns a building on a lot and they own the land underneath and they take care of this on their own. They have easements and sharing costs on infrastructure that I don't think the town necessarily needs to really go that next step. It's something that, like I said, if somebody wanted to do that, they could do it. I mean, there's another way to accomplish it. We don't need to really see the benefit.
Yeah, so in our past discussions, we haven't really seen the benefit to this PMLD language. I think we were leaving it in as a simplicity, but in further discussion, it really should be removed. I think the committee isn't seeing any value in it, and it will only be confusing.
And I think there was more concern, like with the more recent discussion for the B1 that we've had, I think there was the heightened concern about the PMLD could create a whole nother situation, a scenario that people had even more concerns about. So
again, I think we're headed down the road of recommending that it be removed. I don't know, any comments from the rest of the committee? All right.
Hey, Rich, did we happen to hear from any landowners that saw benefit in this? Or was it all negative?
I haven't heard from many property owners that said it was beneficial, but there might I haven't heard anybody, but there may be somebody, I suppose. But
Okay.
like I said, the thing that we do need to be clear going forward, and this came up a while ago in the discussion, is that we do want to encourage multiple buildings on one lot if it makes sense. So we want to be clear about that, explicit in the zoning bylaw, that it's not one lot, one building necessarily, because there could be advantages from a site design to be able to allow for multiple buildings on one lot. That's the only editorial as we go down this discussion. It's been applied that you can do more than one building on a lot, but I think it might be worth clarifying that point as part of this package going forward.
All right. I guess that was an easy one, or did I not get to opening it to the public? Any comments from the public?
Don't see any
All
hands.
right. Then on to Susan and building height.
Okay, so I'm assuming everybody here knows, but building height addresses the allowable height that any building can be above the average grade level in town. So
Susan, sorry, let me jump in real quick. I'll give my quick executive summary, if you don't mind.
okay,
All right, so building height, as Susan just mentioned, average height above grade level. The existing zoning language allows 40 feet to the roof peak, with an exception to allow 46 feet per special permit approval. In no case shall a building exceed 3 stories. Other decorative features of the building can exceed the height requirement with a max height of 80 feet. And there's language addressing facade detailing, and that all buildings shall have the look of pitched slope roofs. Right, so our previous proposal considered changing the allowable height to 46 feet as of right to the middle of the slope of the roof. Change the allowable number of stories from 3 to 3.5, and no change to the decorative features language, and no change to the facade detailing and building look language. Right, so the current recommendation, as noted, is keep the existing bylaws as written for lots smaller than 70,000 square feet. And for lots larger than 70,000 square feet is change the allowable height to 46 feet to the middle of the slope roof. Change the number of stories from 3 to 3.5. Require a 12-foot minimum clear floor to bottom of structure at the street level. Again, that's to promote retail. And then no change to the decorative features and no change to the facade detailing. So essentially it's creating, it's taking the expansion of the heights and saying it's applicable to larger lots. Back to you, Susan. Sorry.
Could I ask a quick question before Susan starts? I don't want to interrupt her later. Did you say mid-peak? Not the peak of the building, but mid-peak is 46 feet?
That's the way the current language is written, correct?
The
Wait,
language you're
I'm sorry.
recommending?
That's the recommendation is to mid-peak, correct?
Can you just clarify for a non-architect person why you wouldn't just do the peak? Why would you leave that out? Like, why would you say mid-peak? Is there a reason? And like, what would be that true height then?
I think it's because it's trying to capture the actual true usable height of the space rather than just define the peak height, right? So I mean, one could say that the peak height is just as arbitrary as the mid-peak height, but the mid-peak height starts to say that's the top of your half a floor, right? And that's the top of your occupied space.
So the 46 feet is the top of the occupied space?
yes.
The middle of the slope, correct? Yeah.
Martha, I addressed the piece of that. What it means is it's where 46 right now would be from floor to the ceiling of, say, the third unit, right? The third floor. You'd still have as much as you, I don't know if people can see me, I'm kind of talking with my hands. You would still have your pitched roof, which would create sort of like attic space or storage space, and, or, you know, for builders, I'm sure they can speak to this. I would assume that's where your HVAC, your ductwork, things like that could all be tucked into that half story. So the reason they say it is, so in essence, a building would eventually be, if we allowed 3.5 stories, the average building at 3.5 stories, if we went to the full 46, would be between 52 and 53 feet. So it would actually be around a just under 55-foot building in the center of town. And for a point of reference, which I cover in my little spiel of stuff, is that Walgreens is around 22 feet tall. So it would be more than twice the height of Walgreens.
But for reference, that's only adding 9 feet to the allowable height of today's code.
Oh, okay, but that's okay, that's helpful. Thank you for that point of reference. I appreciate it.
So I'm sure you guys can guess that I don't want to change it to 3.5 feet. Though it's burdensome for developers, I think the town feedback has been consistent that they don't want buildings this tall in the center of town. I wasn't privy to the discussion that you had prior to joining the committee. I see in the notes that I was given in the discussion, it said that feedback was not to change, and then it was voted to change anyway. I wasn't part of that because I wasn't on the committee yet, but I'm not sure. I would love someone to explain if the feedback was to not change it that you were receiving, why did you move forward to change it? That was a question I had. I think that a lot of the things that we're doing are to please developers, and we're using the excuse that, or the thought process that, hey, you should change this because if you don't, it'll help because then people won't go 40B. But in essence, a 40B is way more profitable for any developer than a non-40B. And the reason I say that is because a 40B, like the one they were contemplating doing at 194 Main Street, I in case anyone didn't know, they have changed that from the 60 unit apartments to 36 townhouses. I'm not sure on the 36, but around that. But in essence, if we're doing a mixed use building and we say someone who wants it to be more profitable will just go 40B because the percentage of units they can put on that first floor versus renting out commercial space would offset the 25% they have to do in affordable. It just does. So any developer who wants to make the most money is going to go 40B no matter what. They're not even going to bother with this because they don't want the first floor to be commercial. This is only going to be for someone who doesn't want 40B for whatever reason because they want commercial space, but the average price for commercial space in Norfolk is $15 to $20 a square foot. You could put however many more, an entire floor. Let's say you had 20 units on a floor. If you could put another 20 units on the ground floor at whether you're renting them out or selling them, at much more than $20 a square foot is my point. So I think that we're giving things away that we don't need to give away just because we're scared of 40B. That's my opinion. I did compile a lot of information that I don't necessarily want to go through unless someone has questions, but I just wanted you to know that I am prepared, whether it be tonight or at town meeting, to answer most questions. And I would love the questions because if you end up having a question that I'm not prepared for, it's not on my piece of paper of questions, then I would be able to look that up before town meeting. And that's my whole point, is that I want to be prepared. No matter what my own personal opinion is, whatever this board decides to vote forward, I need to be able to answer those questions. It's not going to change how I personally vote, but it will allow me to educate myself and make sure that I'm educating the town, not on my opinion, but on what the board has voted on. And I want to be prepared to answer any questions. So Rich has some pictures of buildings that I sent him that just show the difference. There's a lot of variation in height online for 2.5 and 3.5 and 46 versus 48 versus 52, but it gives you a general idea of what the look of a 2.5 story building is versus the look of a 3.5 with pitched roofs. That's what I was looking for mostly. There is one building that's a non-pitched roof, just to give you an idea, because a 40B wouldn't have to do a pitched roof. So it was just sort of an idea. So the first couple that you're seeing are obviously 3.5 stories. So that is first story, second story, third story residential. They don't really, you can't really find pictures where it says, I searched mixed use, I searched everything. I can find mixed use. I can't find 3.5 story mixed use. So what I'm using is it's all residential, but you get the idea, even if it was commercial on the bottom. So those are all 3.5 stories, with the top story being storage or builder areas. And then if you scroll down, you can see the difference in with a 2.5. So if you keep going a little bit more, that's the, oh, sorry, Rich, go back up 1 second. It has a flat roof. One more down, this last white one. It has a flat roof, so it's not ideal for comparison purposes, but that is commercial on the bottom with two floors of apartments on the top. So that is what, in essence, a 3.5 story would be. Granted, ours would have pitched roofs, and we're not talking design. It would not look like that, but that's the idea. That's how tall it would roughly be. Then if you go down, you can see what the difference is with 2.5. So 2.5 will, even when it's apartments and commercial on the bottom, would still look more like the height of a single family home. Obviously it wouldn't look like a single family home, but it would have the similar height of that. And if you go down one more, there shows a drawing that I was able to find that shows the one set of apartments above with a commercial on the bottom, the look, and it, they did them in individual, sections. And that's a 2.5 story. So that's kind of what I would like to see in that area. I think a 55-foot building or 46 would dwarf in front of Walgreens if that was allowed. That's all anyone would ever see in our downtown area. They wouldn't see anything else. I also don't think it doesn't any more encourage a walkable downtown than having only 2.5 stories. So there you go. That's my spiel. Does anyone have any questions that I can answer? Because I tried to put a lot of thought into this, and I actually called a few people around town. So not all of these answers are mine. I asked multiple people in the town who I think either serve on boards or attend a lot of meetings and are very involved, just so I could get feedback from them on what they'd like to see, what hidden pitfalls would be, what proposed questions might be, should they have them, and what their thought process was. So I just want to make sure that's clear that not all of these answers are mine solely. So
Susan, I have a question. The picture we're looking at with the blue roofs, you
Yes.
call that a 2.5 story?
yes, because that's one story on the bottom and then a
Yeah.
second story on the top. And then with
Yeah.
a pitched roof, it's a half story.
So that even the roof is, that's considered a half story. I thought a half story would consider, usable space, so like another floor, but under the gable.
No, from my understanding, you have to have a full 9 feet, and a 2.5 story would be 12 feet on the bottom if you wanted it commercial, and 9 feet above with a half story, which would be 5.5 feet tucked in. So if you didn't do commercial, when someone doesn't do commercial on the bottom, then their first floor only has to be 9 feet. But if we're talking about non-40B, we're talking about mixed use. So if it was mixed use, it would be 12 feet on the bottom, 9 feet above, and then roughly 5 to 6 feet of attic space, so to speak. Whether the builder was able to do it through storage or ductwork or just eaves and pitches and insulation, I'm not a builder. I didn't get that in depth as to what would actually be in that half story. But having built houses myself, I would assume that's what would be up there. So
what would you call 18 Union Street?
2.5. It's technically 3 because I don't think the language currently allowed for 2.5. But they only have one floor of apartments. It's one story of apartments with one story of commercial space. So therefore it would be considered 2.5. If they have a full story above it and are using that for storage, I don't know. But to my knowledge, they only have the one story of apartment units.
All right, there's 2 stories of apartments and it's a 3-story building, right?
So 18 Union is considered 3-story or
Yeah,
2.5?
18 units is a 3-story building and it is 1 floor of retail and 2 floors of units.
Okay,
What are they using for their, under their pitch?
They're using 46 feet to the peak.
Which is what you're proposing. So they got a special permit?
No, that's what's in the current guidelines today, right? So they got approval to use 46 feet to the peak.
I'll pull up the plans as we're discussing. I think it'll be helpful, right?
Right. So they got a special permit because that's not
Yeah.
what's currently written. They got
Well,
a
it's, by special permit, you're allowed 46 feet to the peak.
Well, Rich is looking for that. Could you speak, Aaron, to why the recommendation from this committee or Josh's group was 46 feet by right?
Yeah, well, I could speak to a couple different things. I'll start with, the purpose of this committee is to promote mixed use development downtown. It's written into our mission and our executive summary statements. So, some of part of promoting development is encouraging change. So falling back on the existing language isn't working. It isn't promoting development. And in the past, the conversations have been that it's not sustainable going forward. So things need to change, or at least that's been the conversations here.
What is who? Could you just identify who says it's not feasible? Is that a developer says the bigger, the more I can fit in there?
Well, I mean, yeah, as the round one, we had Josh organized a number of meetings with the public. They had meetings with the property owners. There was a survey that was done in town.
Yes, we know. We've reviewed the survey and I just read it again. And people want sidewalks and not high buildings. And none of you guys addressed
the data point in the
sidewalks
survey
or
was
the height.
the highest point in the survey was 2 to 4 story buildings, right? So that's what came out of that survey. It was most people were looking for 2 to 4 story buildings. I'd have to dig up the data to that, right?
Well, 2.5 seems pretty close.
So there have been, again, the existing bylaws today allow a 3-story building. So the change and the discussions were another half a story doesn't seem unreasonable to suggest and recommend. So the change is from 3 to 3.5. It's not from 2.5 to 3.5, right?
Okay,
The
but
height
it's
change-
really going up to 53 feet.
The height change was to promote a taller retail floor at street level with 3 complete floors, right? So the thing with 18 Union Street is the second floor of units is in the pitched roof. So the units are, it's not a full floor. It's a less efficient floor, right? So the thought is if we can raise the roof a little bit, we can get a full use of the 3rd floor. So that was part of the reasoning behind going from 3 to 3.5 and from 46 to the peak to 46 to the mid roof.
I think the point that I was simply trying to make is that when you give it away by right, then you're still allowing it to be increased above that in special permit. And since special permit doesn't go through the town, it goes through planning board or zoning board, it's up to whomever has been elected or appointed to those boards. And we don't know what they're going to think or say or do. We, in all honesty, could end up with 3 developers on one of those boards, and they want to see those types of buildings. You cannot predict what they will do. So by giving it away by right, and then there's special permits still allowed for when, like, as you explained to me, it would be for when the lot size warranted it. So why not just say, this is the maximum height. And if the lot size warrants it, and if it is a super friendly build so that it's not 40B, and they're going to do everything else that we've asked, but they just want a little bit more height, they can get that during special permit. That's what you said to me the last time I asked why we needed to do this. And you said if something was off by 1 foot or 2 is why we always allow special permit, so that we're not saying no to something that would be beneficial because it didn't come in at exactly the right height. or exactly the right square footage. So if we're still going to allow special permitting, why not keep it by right at a lower level and then allow it under special permit if it's the right build and it's non-40B, which means they're doing everything else that we wanted. They're bringing in the commercial space. And then if it fits on the lot size and it fits in the location, then the planning board could allow it to go up from there. I think that when you give away up front 3.5, 46 feet, 46 feet is, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't 46 feet to this dark brown, the dark line going straight through?
Again, the difference between 46 and 53 feet is 9 feet.
I understand.
So Rich, can you pull up the APC report, go to the design guidelines and pull up page 71 of 83?
But we're at 40 feet right now. We're not at 46 feet. We're only at 40 feet
fine.
and then with 46 feet through special permit.
Okay, so it goes from 9 feet to 14 feet, right? So you're right. We added 14 feet by right, 9 feet by the last project approved for downtown. So as Rich pulls up the design guidelines, I'd also like to mention that the way the recommendation is currently written is the added height would only be for sites of 70,000 square feet and greater.
Mhm.
And as we talked about earlier in this meeting, there's only 6 sites in town right now that are greater than 70,000 square feet.
Unless lots are combined again.
But then as lots are combined, you have less buildings.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
if
What
you
I'm saying is,
if you combine 2 or 3 lots to get 70,000 square feet, then you only have 1 building versus 2, or 2 buildings versus 3. So you have less density over time in town, right? So
again,
what Rich has pulled up on screen is from the design guidelines, which shows an illustration of a 3.5-story building with photographs of 3-story buildings in town today, right?
again, what I was saying is 9 feet. You keep saying it's only 9 feet, but 9 feet is an additional floor. And if we are speaking about, which I believe we all are, a mixed use building, which is commercial on the bottom and then apartment units up top. And let's say that it allowed for 20 apartment units above this commercial, that's an additional 20 apartment units just in that building alone.
Right, except that's the unit development conversation, which we'll get into at another point in time, right? So I mean, this isn't.
But it's not. 9 feet allows for an entire.
But the number of units is set by a different.
I was just using the
bullet
number
point.
of units as an example.
Right, but you were implying that we could put just implying by the height change that we could add 20 units to a development. I don't think that's an accurate statement.
Okay. What I'm saying is whatever the size the development is, let's say it was 8 apartment units, let's say it was 15, let's say it was 20, let's say it was 40. It doesn't matter the number. My point is that 9 feet is an additional floor. It's an additional story. And it's only giving away 9 feet by right, but that is now a 2.5-story apartment building above a 12-foot commercial space, which creates, again,
right, which is entirely the point, Susan. It's
But
entirely the point. The point is to put residential development above commercial to make it all financially viable.
But who does this
That
benefit?
is the point. The
doesn't
point is to
benefit
put
the
residential units above commercial space.
I understand, but you're speaking as if this is a benefit to the town. How is this a benefit to the town? This is a benefit to the developer. And the point is we're not sitting here to make what is right for the developer and make it easier for them so that they can make more money. We are here to do what is right for the town of Norfolk. And in my opinion, which I was assigned this one, and I could have been assigned any one, but this is the one I happen to be assigned. I think that to be obtuse and say that it's only 9 feet, it's an additional story. And depending on the square footage of the building that goes in, an additional story could be anything from 6 more apartment units to 25 more apartment units, depending on the lot that it was on. And since we're not speaking about specific lots, we're just speaking in general terms, adding an entire story of apartments is not what this town wants or needs, nor is it what this town can support. And we're not here to make it easier for a developer. We are here to do what this town wants, in my opinion.
We are here to promote.
Erin, can I throw?
The town will decide what they want, but yeah, go right ahead, Kevin.
So I hear a lot of this is helping the developer. This is not what the town wants. A lot of these decisions and discussions were based on primarily our discussions with Josh, an expert in the field of municipal planning, where we asked him, how do we relax the zoning enough where we're able to get our desired output while also making it feasible for us to actually see projects? Up until this point, one of our biggest frustrations is that we have these open lots, but have seen 0 proposals come through, not even giving us the opportunity to have our planning board or our zoning board of appeals review them and try to shape them into something that could potentially work for the town. So our ask of him was, how do we make it so we start to see projects come across our table? Maybe they're not perfect. Maybe after we're going through a bit of process with our boards and committees who work in the best interest of the town, they don't end up coming to fruition and we move on to the next one. But how do we get the ability to actually see those? And that's where we came up with this outline, at least the basis for this outline. Then past that, we put out a survey in which we presented it in a community forum. And I remember sitting in that room and seeing the majority of people who were responding, voting for between 3 and 3.5 story buildings. I think they went up to 4-story buildings. So it's not like the committee came out of nowhere and said, you know what I'd like to see is a Walpole building. That's not what happened. This was all based on the feedback that we were getting from everybody. If we had sat in that same community meeting and the majority of people had said, I want a 2-story building. That's what I want. That's the max I want to see there. I don't even like what we have on the books right now. I want to see it go down. Then that's what this committee would have focused on, a way to be able to make that work and fit that expectation with producing the walkable town center that we're all trying to get to. So I just want to kind of level set on where these recommendations came from, why they were put forth in the manner they were, and the basis we used to be able to put them together. That's kind of what I wanted to turn this back into, is where all this came from. It wasn't intended to bring in some developers and have them outline for us what would work best for the project they have in a queue, or to disregard whatever the residents have in terms of expectations. Everybody has a different expectation. This committee has been focused on trying to balance those expectations against trying to produce the desired outcome as is laid out in our master plan. So just wanted to kind of level set on all that, understand the perspectives. I think the discussion is good, but just wanted to kind of outline where we got there, how we got there.
And that is all fantastic information. However, I was asked to be on this board specifically to give the recommendations of how the advisory board will vote should this go forward. And based on the way the advisory board, their concerns last year when this came up, and based on discussions that have happened, I think you asked me to come here to tell you how to get this to pass through town. If you want to put language in that limits certain things and ask for other things, that's fine. But I think that when you put in 3.5 stories with 46 feet with another additional, 8 feet in, or 6 feet in the peak, you're asking for this to get voted down. It wouldn't be passed by the advisory board. It would end up failing there. And then whether or not it passes a town, I'm sorry, excuse me. Whether or not it passes a town meeting would depend on which residents show up. And I can guarantee right now, with the discussions that have been going on because of the clearing of the land on 25 Rockwood Road, you're going to get, they've actually started a Facebook group to limit development in this town. So you're going to get a large contingent of people who are going to show up at town meeting who are going to vote this down. So our job is not to help a specific developer. Our job is not to help any developers. Our job is to get zoning changes that are right for this town passed. And that is my recommendation to you based on how the advisory board has voted in the past and the discussions that has been had. And that is my recommendation to you based on the discussions that are currently happening in this town, which, by the way, are very different than what was happening 3 years ago when this or 2 years ago when the survey was done. However, I'm not being specific. No one needs to correct me. However long ago it was. As of today, when they saw 4 acres or 5 acres or however many acres it was being cleared in the center of town, that galvanized a lot of people. And this is going to be something they're going to focus on. Development of large buildings that are going to dwarf the buildings behind them and dwarf everything else on the street is going to have significant pushback at town meeting and will likely not pass. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I could be completely wrong. We could only have pro-development people show up at town meeting. But if you don't have that, this is going to fail. So that is my recommendation, not personally, not based on me living in here. I'm not saying to you, I want to see this. I'm saying to you what's not going to pass. And adding another full story of apartment units is not going to pass. At least it's not likely to. That's my opinion.
Any other committee members have anything to add to this conversation?
I think just the one thing that I think is important. So understand the different viewpoints that are being discussed here. But I think one of the things that I hopefully through this process is that there are people who would like to see different outcomes downtown, some mixed use, some commercial and so forth. So it's trying to strike a balance between what will work for the town, which will be something that somebody would want to make that investment in town center, the town of Norfolk. This is not, an open book for some developer. It's to bring forward development that people have said they would like to see in downtown and have more things over time develop in their town center. The reaction of, what happened on Rockwood Road is totally understandable in some respects, but in the other, it's a development that went 40B that is completely different than what we're talking about here. We're trying to, Susan, as we did discuss, is provide something that works for the town, whoever develops the property, so that we have something that people will be happy with, as opposed to what happened at 25 Rockwood Road, or maybe some other site. So this is the town center. So we're trying to give an option here. And I think that's what we're trying to be balanced and responsible about it.
I completely understand that. But I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who says, when they say they want a walkable downtown, they don't actually want apartment buildings in downtown. They want businesses. They want commercial businesses, restaurants, bars, hangout spaces, retail shops, ice cream shops, dance studios, congregating and meeting places. That's what they want. But the problem is that the only way a developer will build that is if they can build apartment units above it, because that's where the money is at this point. But in 10 years, that may not be where the money is, because there are multiple apartment buildings that have gone up in our area, not in Norfolk, obviously, but in our area, who have sat empty, completely empty. The one across from Target, for example, I understand it's much larger than what we're speaking of. Please don't tell me that. I already know that. They sat 2/3 empty for 2 years. And because they could not rent them out, they're now going Section 8 housing, because the developer gets a percentage point off of his, a quarter of a percentage point off of his mortgage, and he still makes money on what they're rented out for. Granted, they're rented out for less because it's Section 8 housing. So we're talking about something that doesn't even necessarily have a need. There is not a huge clamoring of people who need apartments in Norfolk. So when people say they want a walkable downtown,
Susan, if I might, I think this conversation's devolved a bit. Again, we're here to talk about promoting mixed use development in the center of Norfolk in the B-1 district, right? So some of the items we've talked about tonight are admittedly about loosening up the zoning guidelines, increasing density, and agreed, in all likelihood, more developer friendly. I understand that there will be opposition to these ideas, and I welcome that opposition to show up and express their concerns. I also welcome that opposition to help us and the committee develop how do we promote mixed use development in the center of Norfolk.
Isn't that what we're doing now, Aaron? Isn't that what we're trying to discuss now and trying to say as a group, hey, maybe we want to scale this back? I think that's some of the feedback that you might be hearing.
Chris, I think what I'm failing to understand is that a lot of the opposition that I'm hearing this evening is what we have is just fine.
Well, to Mr. Haddad's point, he felt like the 18 Union Street property was the largest scale that he wanted to see within the town. I feel like I agree with that point as well. That fell within the present guidelines. So again, I asked the question, to what end? What are we trying to accomplish here when we have existing examples within the town that fit the roofing guidelines that we'd like, that meet our present guidelines? Why are we changing it if not for the developer?
And I just want to say that I felt like they're going back to some of what Kevin said, that the problem of developing in Norfolk is not just, oh, your height isn't high enough, because I could get a special permit, which you're now offering by right, but that there was water, sewer, that there were all these other issues that so to sort of boil it down to, oh, we're not friendly enough with our zoning. So if we've got to really blow it up to make it work for this mixed use, which I don't want anybody to think that Chris or I are against mixed use or developing the town center, but it has to be a discussion and a balanced view. And the 46 to 52 foot building doesn't seem like that.
Susan, let me reiterate my question then. If
that's okay. This is Martha talking, but that's okay.
Sorry, Martha. If the point is to, I mean, again, it seems like maybe what we're hearing is the zoning in downtown Norfolk is just fine. The development is proceeding at an acceptable rate, and the town is getting what it wants, right?
No, I don't think
maybe there's not a need to change the zoning. I'm just a little, I hear a lot of, we don't need to change anything, and not a lot of, this is what we should change to. And I think, having had these conversations over the last 2 years plus, I just feel like the committee's going backwards rather than forwards. And the goal is to get to a place where we're all promoting what we think will be successful for the town of Norfolk.
And I agree. And I think it seems like there are differing perspectives. You have a very strong perspective, and it feels like you're trying to move beyond it because you, for whatever reason, maybe you have great evidence that this number, this height works. And all I'm saying is, I don't think it's fair to hang, nobody wants to develop downtown Norfolk on our bad zoning. That, you know what, there's a lot more to it. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows developers have come, made gentlemen's deals that then did not go through, that they wanted to put in certain kinds of things that for whatever reason, the people and the boards that were working at the time didn't agree with that. So to say, hey, we surveyed 500 people out of a population of 10,000, we heard what they wanted, when I would argue there's stuff that was conveniently left off of that feedback, not addressed in your sort of redesign of town center. So I think conversation and discussion is important, and it feels like you want to move forward because it's something that you have bought into, you believe in it, that's great. Convince the rest of us
Aaron, could I
that it's
ask
not
Josh-
about the developer.
Thank you.
Could I ask Josh a question?
Go ahead, John.
Thank you. Hi, Josh.
Hi.
Couple of things, a comment and a question. I think that the building height, the footprint size, and the number of units are all intimately connected. As you know, you're going to design a building and we have minimal setbacks, none on the sides, 10 in the front, 10 in the back. There's a lot of maneuvering now to put a different size building in. Also affected by the parking and whether parking is, some of that's going to be underground. With the septic rules, from what I understand, and Eileen may know this better than me, I believe they're going to change to the state rules, which means that we're going to save 1/3 of the footprint for a septic system and now have that able to be usable space as far as the footprint goes. And when you come to town and say developers need this or need that, years ago, when we put these 16 bedrooms in, I did a financial prototype. We're available the price of the land in the center. The prices for construction are also available. The prices for rental are available, and the prices for 1 or 2 bedroom condos are available. I think there's a lot more credibility if you come, and I'll tell you for a fact, we're talking with Tommy, who is a friend of mine, we don't have enough units. Tommy had to put down substantially more money to make that project viable. And most people won't put down the deposit that Tommy did to make all the numbers work. So that being said, if you did a prototype saying, look at, on this investment, we need this many units to make this thing profitable, and show people the science on paper, then you start to work around, how can we get this in? Can we, by using the footprint or putting some parking on the first floor underneath? Can we leave the height alone? Can we use the septic that was going to be needed, that's not needed, to make this work? Because more than likely, if you go too high and you put this building, and the one place it's available is across from Walgreens, so you're going to be surrounded by Ivy's Music, which is a one-story little cape, Walgreens, which is like a story and a half, Silla's, which is a story and a half, and across the street, the Linder building is 1 story or 2. So it really is going to block a lot of the essence of those properties back there. And I think maybe if you figured out how many units do we really need for an outside guy come in and say, geez, this project makes sense, we can all back into that and go into the center of town and go into town meeting and say, look, this is why things are sitting. This is why people won't build. And we have to show them the financial background, like anybody that's going to buy and develop's going to do, to say, this is what we need to make this work. So when you come up with the number of units that you know will work, we have a ratio now of how many 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms sell the best. I think that's all a past record. Maybe we can come up with some type of setup for the footprint that ties in the number of units and the building height to make this more plausible. Because like I said, you know, I feel for you folks. I've sat on these meetings for a long time, and we do need more units. And again, that's proven by what was just done. But I think it might be a little bit more involved, just saying that we want to maximize this and make this height. And I think we have to interconnect the 3 of them and go to town meeting and show them why. This is why these lots have been sitting. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can respond to that too, John, I appreciate those perspectives, and I think you're right. The dynamics between all of those parts of a development, so the building height, the unit count, footprint size, parking, all these zoning metrics which we're discussing at length are intimately related and result in the ultimate size and feasibility of the development. Over the arc of my career as an architect and planner working in settings just like Norfolk Center, I have worked to both on the developer's side and on the planning side of things to design feasible projects of this kind. Could do a financial feasibility analysis, but it is, while you're solving for the specifics, it is dependent on variables of the developer, depending on how much they, if they own the land outright, how much they need to acquire the land for, what their lending parameters are, what their access to capital is. So there's a bunch of things which are specific to the developer. And to be honest, given the context of the conversations that I'm hearing here, I don't think that additional work and evidence to bring forward would actually tip the scales in terms of an understanding or acceptance from the community in this moment, from what I've heard.
Well, my only point was that it just lets you go to, we're not going to have precise numbers, and granted, we don't know who's going to build what, but we could have just a general discussion, a general pro forma of what possibly this could be, and the reasons why we're asking for this many more units. That's all. As can saying, we need it. I mean, as you heard from the Henrys, and you'll probably hear this from other town folk, why do we need it? We need it for whom? And this would just, again, this is not going to be precise, but most numbers aren't precise. You want an accuracy to bring this forward with general parameters. And if you folks throw in some special permit zoning in there to maybe account for some of these things that could happen based on who the particular individual is, maybe that would help also.
I appreciate that. I would say, in that general sense, those types of considerations are built into our recommendations and our experience in terms of what is feasible in these circumstances. I would say that while responding to some of the comments that have been made, you do want to protect the town's position, but this is a compromise between where the town is at and where a developer may be. The town itself is not going to develop these properties. It will be a developer who develops these properties. So it has to be a compromise between what the town feels protected by and what a developer would actually act upon in terms of their own interest and feasibility. So that compromise position is exactly where the 3.5 stories came from. So the 3 stories is what exists. We've talked about all this. The developers would not want the town to land at 3.5 stories. It is not enough in terms of the height that they would prefer. It is a compromise position. So you're still not giving away that aspect to developers. It's still not what they would want in actuality. So I think that it's a reasonable position. If you want to keep it at 3, I think that the town may feel more protected there. It's just that where you end up in that spectrum of the likelihood of whether or not a property might actually see that investment from a developer, you might be a little further down the scale in terms of it being less likely. So that I'll stop there, but those are some of the comments I would make.
I have a question before you move on. Has this would obviously be for the few people here who are on multiple boards, or I know John, you know, was on the planning board. Have there been projects by developers that have been brought forth for any of the areas in the B1 that would be within our zoning, but we told them, or they needed more from us and we told them no? I guess what I'm trying to say is we're making these changes, but a developer that wants to maximize units is just going to go 40B. They're not even going to fool with the commercial on the bottom. There's no incentive for them. What they lose in the 25% they have to do for affordable, they make up for by having another entire floor of units. So I'm just curious if, when we say we're trying to encourage it, has anyone brought forth something and we've said no because it doesn't fall within our zoning?
Not in my memory. And unfortunately, the fact of the matter is where our location is, people stay away from retail development like the plague. Nobody wants to do that. And that's why my thought with between 15% affordable on zoning and 25% 40B, with the chance of having the first floor built out and sold condos, they'd go 40B every time, along with the fact that they could avoid folks like me on the planning board. But it's a hard thing because we have something, and more than likely you're probably going to be left with people that are local that want to up their own business and be a part of the town. Tommy DePlacido built that unit and was outside the norms of what a good investment should be because he would never do a 40B. He loves the town. He likes doing real nice buildings, and that's not very common today. So the quest is really hard, and that's why people just stay away from this commercial on Main Street or on Main Street. And you know what, the Stop and Shop lot, the reason we wanted to get a market there because a market is a destination place for. You go develop that with retail on the first floor, and my question, and it was before, it is now, who wants to rent retail on a dead end? I mean, there's no visibility there. You're going to be hard pressed to get retail stores on the Stop and Shop lot when it's on a dead end. So, I mean, another quirk in the whole matter there also.
Aaron, if I could throw something in there.
All right, Kevin.
So I actually really like John's suggestion to outline a pro forma of sorts that would identify a number of units with some sign of quantification put against it to identify what would be necessary to be able to make a project as what we're proposing feasible for a developer. I think he's right that up until this point, we've been speaking in theoreticals a lot, and I feel that there might be some value to being able to justify those types of things with some kind of financial analysis outline. At least it would give us some kind of basis and justification to the level of which we're proposing these types of increases. Josh, I know that you seem like you're kind of against that, but would hesitantly do it if it was asked. But I just wanted to throw out there that I think there would be some value in that in terms of being able to define where some of this need is coming from.
I would just like to point out that I've been asking for that very pro forma for every meeting that we've had thus far. So I welcome that. I hope that comes to be, because I think that's the missing piece here of show me the justification, show me why we're doing this. And Josh, to your point of that, developers want to see 4-story plus in order for it to be profitable. I don't care. That's not what I want to see in the center of Norfolk. And I welcome everyone's opinion to that. If you do want to see that, speak up. But I don't. And yes, there is some comfortable medium between here and there, but it doesn't need to be that the builder sets the guidelines at 4 or 5 stories, so then I have to meet him at 3.5.
Josh, I think maybe the thing that could help, and especially what John mentioned with 18 Union, is kind of create almost a snapshot of who the developer would be that would be likely to develop. So for example, there was a lot that went into 18 Union that is not necessarily a typical developer. So is it somebody, within our region? We're not talking about somebody who is, or, what's their financial wherewithal to make it happen from the zoning standpoint. So, I think the concern people had is that the way the zoning is being structured, it's XY investment company or real estate company from outside the region is going to come in and develop in Norfolk Center. And I think what you're saying is the way the zoning is structured, it's not really favorable to them because the numbers don't work. So then let's talk about who is most likely to develop. It is the property owner in partnership with somebody to develop, or somebody else, just to kind of create a better snapshot. Because I think what happened in 18 Union is not, there was a lot that went into that financially to make that all work. That is not a typical situation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the circumstances surrounding a lot of these properties and the context of Norfolk would lead you to believe that it would be a more local developer with a more sort of one-off customized financial scenario that would get them to viability on one of these properties. I think at the most, in terms of scaling up and the size of what a developer might be, is you would see someone like Eastern Development, who's a property owner in the properties that we're talking about, who is a more regional scale developer, but not a national scale developer. So you're not going to see, Avalon Bay or one of those big outfits focusing on one of these properties. I just think it's not in that context. And I wouldn't, Kevin, to your comments too, don't think I would characterize as being opposed, my opinion, as being opposed to the financial feasibility analysis. I agree. It would be another great data point for us to see. We could prepare something like that. I think again, the missing piece, just like in terms of doing another run of a build out analysis, would just be agreeing on what the zoning recipe is that we're testing under that financial feasibility analysis. The analysis that I find most helpful, we call a residual land value analysis. And that's effectively where we would do enough research to plug in all of the assumptions in terms of development costs and all of the assumptions in terms of development revenue, what they could get for rents for commercial and residential, what they could sell a residential unit for if they were selling. We plug all that into a model, which we have developed as a planning model. I don't know that we would, it's good enough for planning purposes. I don't know that we would invest millions of dollars based upon it, but it's good enough for planning purposes. And use all of those assumptions to come up with how much a developer would have left to pay for the land. And our analysis will show that either that number is positive, more than 0, or negative, less than 0. And that realm of residual land value is a test for feasibility of a certain development program. So that's what I would propose as a way that we could do that type of analysis and provide another data point in this.
Josh,
yeah.
excuse me, to that point, could you include some of those developers that you're describing, sort of those mid-level developers that do those types of projects, and maybe include some of the projects that they do, so that we have some sort of examples of that? In other words, if it's not going to be that sort of one-off local builder, and it's likely to be that next level developer, what are those types of developers? Who are they? What are some of the examples of the types of projects that they do? And then we could sort of translate into how does that fit in Norfolk Center?
We could look into that. I'm not sure how if our results would be satisfactory in terms of what we find and are able to report back, but we could look into it and see what we find. And it's also interesting.
It's never going to be a perfect model. So I think we've got to start putting some numbers at this. We've got to start putting some real life examples of, hey, these are the types of projects. This is what they look like. We've got to put some scale to this, or to Susan's point, forget about it.
Something's better than nothing, right? Is that what you're basically saying? I would think more or less, right?
Something's better than nothing.
Yeah.
So I actually had the question, could we do a financial analysis in my paperwork as one of my things that I had written down. And I think that it would be helpful to know if 2 stories is profitable, right? Is it profitable to have a commercial on the bottom with one set of apartment units or condos or townhomes or whatever, even if they're 2-story townhomes because of the 3 feet with the special permit, if that's profitable? We're not saying, I hope that what you didn't get from that was that I thought people should come in and build things and not make money off them. I'm not an idiot. I know that developers need to make money or else they're not going to build. But I think we need to figure out what is the minimum amount that is profitable. And that's where we need to set our baseline for our zoning, and then allow more with special permit, depending on if it's the right project and if it's going to cause the developer to walk away from a project that we feel is good. If we don't, then we at least have the room to add it in special permit. But just saying that, hey, developers want 4 stories, we only want 2, let's meet in the middle at 3, whatever the concept was, I think it's a better idea to figure out what they absolutely must have to make a profit. What is financially feasible for someone to develop? If we may find out that only 50,000 units with 4 stories is financially feasible. And then our zoning laws don't make any sense, don't matter at all. And everyone should just go 40B because that's all that's ever going to make any money for them. We don't know until we do the work. But if we're talking about straight changes to the zoning, I would not, my recommendation would be to leave it as is, which is allowable height with special permit, but staying under 3 stories otherwise.
Right. Well, we've reached the 2.5 hour mark. So let's move on. I think the last bullet item we had tonight was the calendar review. Rich, I don't know if you want to pull up the current version of the calendar. The next meeting, oh, I don't know. Kevin, do you know when the Springtown meeting's happening? You're muted, Kevin.
Yeah, we're going to be voting tomorrow night to move Springtown meeting to the 24th.
All right, so our next meeting is scheduled for the 29th, so that can still hold. We have items D, E, and F. I don't remember who's assigned to those. I'll have to take a look. And then Rich mentioned the wastewater master plan is going to do a presentation there. I think our next meeting after that was talked about being moved from the week of July 4th to the 13th.
Just out of curiosity, June 29th is more than a month away from now. Do we want to put an additional meeting prior to June 29th and then have the June 29th meeting and then hold until the end of July? Just to accommodate, people, once social distancing is lifted, I would imagine people are going to start taking vacations. And I don't know if we're going to start meeting in person at any point. Like I said, I can certainly call in from the Cape, but
I thought we had a meeting on June 15th was actually in my calendar previously.
Oh, yep, no, I missed that one. You're right. We
Okay.
do have a meeting on the 15th.
that was my suggestion, just because we want to try to get this,
Yeah.
stuff taken care of as soon as possible. Okay, so June 15th and June 29th.
Yeah, so this I'll have to change. So town meeting is not going to be the 8th. Well, actually technically the 9th, right? Kevin, you said 24th?
This isn't right. This is, something happened here. Right, we have I don't know why we have the 29th. It was supposed to be the 15th, right? And then the 13th, somehow the 29th popped in. Did we? Okay, because the D and E are on the 15th and then F, G, and H are the July meeting, right? So I know somehow these two meetings popped up in here. So I guess means we need at least one of them. So
I think we discussed last week, because July 6th falls on 4th of July, the Monday of 4th of July weekend. So we moved it. We already had the June 15th and we moved the July 6th back a week to the 29th, which still allowed to have a meeting at the end of July if we wanted to. I think we were just condensing them so that we stayed away from 4th of July.
all right, so this is, so it's just the letters that got mixed up, right? So the 29th is F, G, and H. Right, so the meeting on the 15th is D and E, and then the 29th is F, G, and H. And then no meeting in the middle of July, and our next meeting is the 27th of July. So we have the 15th of June, the 29th of June, and the 27th of July.
Okay. And for now, we're just assuming that they're all going to remain Zoom meetings until we hear differently, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
Is that Aaron, is that how you feel about it?
sounds that way.
I would assume so, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to move this to the 24th June.
Might want to wait till tomorrow night. Never know.
All right, well, I'll wait to move it till tomorrow night. Yep. The 15th stays, right? So that stays. We just said D and E.
For June 15th, yeah, we just said that stays.
Okay. All right. Oops, sorry. Damn it. Oh, what the heck? Sorry. Okay. All right, so June 15th stays. All right. Sorry to bounce around. So the 29th we're keeping of June?
Yeah, I updated that, Rich, as we were talking, so this one's
Okay.
current.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. Yep. Okay. And then we're going to move to the 13th of July, right? For that?
No,
No,
no meeting on the 13th of July. We have the 15th of June, we have the 29th of June, and we have the 27th of July.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Okay.
So I noticed that you have the MAPC report presentation in here for town meeting. I believe the last time I spoke with Jay, he was recommending that even if the measures are lifted and we can hold town meeting, they're going to be focusing solely on trying to streamline everything. I shouldn't say focusing only on budgets, but we have to get through town budget in both school presentations. So it may be that Josh, if he's going to present, he may want to make it as condensed as possible. That's what I would assume. So I think Jay is trying to keep people to encourage attendance. He's trying to keep it at as short of a meeting as possible. I'm not saying that's the case. Don't.
Yeah, no,
I'm just
yeah,
letting you know you may be asked to shorten it. So I was just letting you know that to keep that in mind. I just didn't want you to be unprepared. So, but certainly feel free to speak to Jay about how much time he's going to allow you should we even be able to have a town meeting.
yeah, so I did, Susan, I did reach out to Jay earlier, and he did tell me that he's allowed it, but it has to be brief. So,
That's what I figured, but I wasn't sure anyone had spoken to him. And when I saw that written there, I was like, I didn't think you would want to come with your full presentation.
no, yeah, he said 15 minutes.
Okay.
All right. So I guess we'll talk on the 15th of June.
Okay.
Talk to everybody later.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.